Picture the desert at night, 3,000 years ago. The wind carries whispers across dunes that have swallowed entire kingdoms. In the distance, a city glows against the star-drunk sky, not with the flickering orange of torches, but with something steadier, something impossible. The light spills from windows, carved into limestone temples. It dances along corridors where priests move like shadows, their faces illuminated not by flame, but by a pale, electric radiance that seems to breathe with the rhythm of the earth itself. This is not our history. This is not the story we've been told. We know electricity as the child of the modern age, born in laboratories, tamed by men in powdered wigs who flew kites into storms and built the first generators. The accepted narrative tells us that before Edison's bulb cast its first glow in 1879, humanity stumbled through millennia of darkness, guided only by fire and starlight. But what if that narrative is wrong? What if electricity didn't begin with Benjamin Franklin's key, but existed in forms we've forgotten? What if the ancients held secrets that died with them, buried beneath sand and silence? The possibility haunts every archaeologist who has ever brushed dust from an artifact that doesn't quite fit. It whispers through museums where objects sit behind glass, their true purpose lost to time. It lingers in the shadows of pyramids and the depths of temples, where acoustics behave in ways that defy explanation and stones fit together with impossible precision. Tonight, we journey into that darkness. We'll walk through ruins where mainstream archaeology sees only primitive achievements and ask the question that changes everything. What if they weren't primitive at all? What if ancient civilizations had electricity, and we, despite all our technology, are simply rediscovering what once was known? The evidence waits in fragments, in myths that speak of gods who carried lightning, in artifacts that resemble our modern inventions far too closely to be coincidence, in engineering marvels that required precision our ancestors supposedly couldn't possess. Some will call it fantasy. Others will see the threads of a lost tapestry, woven from copper and ambition, from knowledge and catastrophe. The truth, like electricity itself, flows along paths we can barely trace. It jumps across gaps in our understanding, illuminating moments of clarity before disappearing into the dark again. But here, in this space between certainty and wonder, stories emerge. Stories of civilizations that may have harnessed forces we thought were ours alone to discover. The journey begins with a single spark, the possibility that everything we thought we knew about our past needs to be reimagined. That somewhere in the forgotten corners of history, ancient hands once flipped switches we didn't think existed. And in that possibility, the darkness doesn't seem quite so absolute anymore. The story begins, as most scientific stories do, with curiosity and accident. In 1752, Benjamin Franklin stood in a Philadelphia thunderstorm, rain soaking through his clothes as he watched his kite dance with death in the electric sky. The key tied to the string sparked, and with that spark, the modern understanding of electricity was born. Or so we tell ourselves. The accepted timeline unfolds like a carefully orchestrated symphony. First movement, Franklin's experiments with static electricity and his famous kite. Second movement, Alessandro Volta's battery in 1800, the first reliable source of continuous electric current. Third movement, Michael Faraday's generator in 1831, transforming mechanical motion into electrical energy. By the 1870s, the crescendo Edison's incandescent bulb and Tesla's alternating current systems illuminating cities for the first time in human history. This is the narrative that fills textbooks and museum displays. Humanity spent tens of thousands of years in darkness, cooking over fires, navigating by torchlight, their nights ruled by moon and stars. Then, in the span of barely 2 centuries, we mastered the force that now powers our entire world. It's a compelling story of progress, of human ingenuity triumphing over nature's limitations. The Industrial Revolution becomes humanity's coming of age, the moment we stepped out of our primitive past and into the electric future. But timelines, like electricity itself, can be deceptive. They flow in neat, linear patterns until they encounter resistance. They follow expected paths until something disrupts their course. And when we look more closely at the evidence scattered across archaeological sites and ancient texts, that resistance begins to build. The mainstream timeline assumes that complexity is modern, that sophisticated understanding of natural forces is recent. It places the discovery of electricity firmly in the hands of European scientists and American inventors, as if the laws of physics themselves waited politely for the Enlightenment before revealing their secrets. Yet electromagnetic forces have existed since the beginning of time. Lightning has split the sky since the first storms. Lodestones have attracted iron since the earth was young. The potential for electrical discovery has been present in every civilization, in every age. The question isn't whether ancient peoples could have discovered electricity. The question is whether we've been looking for the evidence in the wrong places, using the wrong assumptions about what prehistoric technology might have looked like. Our timeline assumes that electrical knowledge must follow our own path of development, that batteries must look like voltas, that generators must resemble Faraday's, that any evidence of ancient electricity must mirror our modern understanding perfectly. But perhaps that's our limitation, not theirs. Perhaps they found different paths to the same destination. Perhaps they developed technologies that worked with principles we've forgotten, using materials and methods that don't survive the millennia in ways we can easily recognize. The accepted timeline of power may not be wrong, but it might be incomplete. A chapter in a much longer story, rather than the beginning of the tale. And if that's true, then everything we think we know about human civilization needs to be reconsidered. As we'll discover, the fragments of that longer story wait in places mainstream science hasn't thought to look. They hide in plain sight, dismissed as religious artifacts or misunderstood relics. The real timeline of electricity might stretch back not centuries, but millennia. And the darkness that preceded Edison as bulb might not have been quite as dark as we may imagined. In 1938, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig was cataloging artifacts at the Iraq Museum in Baghdad when he encountered something that shouldn't exist. The object was simple enough, a clay jar about 6 inches tall, dating from sometime between 250 BC and 250 AD. Inside the jar, corroded with age, but still recognizable, was a cylinder of sheet copper. And inside that copper cylinder, an iron rod. Koenig held in his hands what appeared to be the components of a galvanic cella battery created more than 2,000 years ago. The artifact had been discovered in 1936 at Qujut Rabu, near Baghdad, along with similar jars that shared the same mysterious construction. Local archaeologists had labeled them as storage vessels, perhaps for sacred scrolls. But Koenig saw something different. He saw electricity in clay and copper. When Koenig published his theory in 1940, the archaeological establishment reacted with the polite skepticism reserved for ideas that challenge fundamental assumptions. Ancient Mesopotamians, they argued, had no knowledge of electrical principles. The jars were clearly ritual objects, or perhaps containers for something far more mundane than miraculous. But the questions persisted, as questions do when they touch something profound. In 1978, Dr. Arne Egebrecht of the Raymer and Pelizius Museum in Germany decided to test Koenig's theory directly. He constructed an exact replica of the Baghdad Battery, filling it with grape juice as an electrolyte. The device produced a measurable electric current, 0.5 volt, for 18 days. 0.5 volt, enough to power a small LED light. Enough to electroplate jewelry, which would explain the surprisingly sophisticated metalwork found throughout ancient Mesopotamia. Enough to prove that electricity was possible in the ancient world, even if we can't prove it was intended. The Baghdad Battery exists in that liminal space between artifact and evidence, between possibility and proof. Mainstream archaeologists have proposed alternative explanations, that the jars held sacred texts, that the metal components were added later, that any electrical properties are purely coincidental. But coincidences, like electrical currents, tend to follow patterns. Similar objects have been found at other sites across the region. The technology required copper, iron, and an acidic electrolyte was readily available to ancient craftsmen. And the sophisticated metalwork of Mesopotamian artisans shows evidence of techniques that would have been greatly enhanced by controlled electrical processes. Perhaps most intriguingly, ancient Sumerian texts speak of divine fire that never consumed, of sacred flames that required no fuel. Could these be garbled memories of electric lights, powered by devices like the Baghdad Battery? The jar sits in its museum display, neither proving nor disproving the revolutionary implications of its existence. It remains what it has always been, a clay vessel containing copper and iron, created by unknown hands for purposes lost to time. Yet in its silence, it poses the most profound questions about the nature of discovery itself. Did the ancient Mesopotamians understand what they had created? Were these batteries part of a broader electrical technology that has been lost to catastrophe and time? Or are we projecting our modern understanding onto objects that serve entirely different purposes? The Baghdad Battery doesn't answer these questions. It simply exists, a humble clay jar that might represent one of the most important discoveries in archaeological history. Or it might represent nothing more than coincidence, our modern minds seeing patterns where none exist. But as we'll discover, it's not alone in its mystery. Across the ancient world, other artifacts wait in museum storage rooms and archaeological sites, equally puzzling, equally suggestive of technologies that shouldn't exist. The Baghdad Battery may be the first piece of a puzzle we're only beginning to understand. A puzzle that suggests our ancestors' relationship with electricity might be far more complex than we've ever imagined. And in that complexity lies the seed of a revolution in how we view human history itself. The Great Pyramid of Giza rises from the desert like a geometric mountain, its limestone blocks fitted with precision that still challenges modern engineering. For over 4,000 years, it has dominated the horizon, inspiring theories that range from the mundane to the magnificent. We're told it's a tomb, a monument to Pharaoh Khufu's ego and the afterlife beliefs of ancient Egypt. Yet the pyramid refuses to yield the evidence that would confirm this explanation. No mummy was ever found inside, no burial goods, no hieroglyphic inscriptions identifying it as a royal sepulchre. Instead, the pyramid contains a labyrinth of chambers, shafts, and passages that serve no apparent burial function. What if we've been asking the wrong question? What if the Great Pyramid wasn't designed to house the dead, but to harness the forces of the earth itself? The theory sounds like science fiction until you examine the details. The pyramid sits atop a vast underground aquifer, its base stones in direct contact with flowing water. The internal chambers contain precisely fitted granite blocks, granite being one of the most radioactive stones found in nature, capable of generating electrical fields through natural radioactivity. The king's chamber, so called despite containing no royal remains, is constructed entirely of red granite blocks cut and fitted with tolerances that would challenge modern masonry. The chamber resonates at a frequency of 438 Hz, the same frequency produced by molecular hydrogen, the lightest and most abundant element in the universe. Could this be coincidence? Or engineering? Christopher Dunn, a precision machinist turned pyramid researcher, has proposed that the Great Pyramid functioned as a massive hydrogen fuel cell. In his theory, the pyramid's internal chambers processed hydrogen gas, creating electrical energy that was then transmitted through the structure's crystalline limestone blocks. The Queen's chamber, he suggests, mixed chemicals that generated hydrogen gas. That gas flowed through small shafts to the king's chamber, where the radioactive granite converted it to electrical energy. The pyramid's gold capstone, long since vanished, would have acted as an antenna, broadcasting that energy wirelessly across the ancient world. Mainstream Egyptology dismisses such theories as pseudoscience. They point to the pyramid's place within a broader funerary complex, its alignment with stellar phenomena associated with death and rebirth, the clear evidence that it was built during Khufu's reign as a tomb, albeit one designed to ensure the pharaoh's divine transformation. Yet the questions multiply faster than the answers. Why was the pyramid built with such extraordinary precision if it served only as a tomb? Why does it incorporate acoustic properties that amplify sound in specific chambers? Why were the internal passages sealed immediately after construction, as if to contain something rather than honor someone? The Pyramid of Giza is not alone in its mysteries. Across Egypt, temples display architectural features that seem designed for purposes beyond worship. The Temple of Dendera contains chambers with no apparent function, except to house strange carved reliefs that look remarkably like modern electrical diagrams. At Saqqara, the step pyramid complex includes underground chambers lined with blue faience tiles that could have served as electrical insulators. The entire complex sits above natural underground streams, creating the same water table conditions that might generate electrical fields. Could ancient Egyptian temples have been power stations disguised as places of worship? Could the priests who tended them have been engineers maintaining technologies we no longer understand? The idea transforms our understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization. Instead of primitive people moving massive stones with ropes and ramps, we see sophisticated engineers who understood principles of energy generation and transmission. Instead of superstitious worshippers bowing to animal-headed gods, we see technicians operating complex machinery designed to harness natural forces. Instead of tombs filled with grave goods for the afterlife, we see power plants that lit ancient cities and powered technologies that have been lost to catastrophe and time. The evidence remains fragmentary, circumstantial, tantalizing rather than conclusive. But it suggests that when we look at ancient monuments, we might be seeing only the skeleton of technologies we can barely imagine. The Great Pyramid continues to guard its secrets, rising from the desert in perfect geometric defiance of time and conventional explanation. Whether tomb or power plant, monument or machine, it stands as testimony to capabilities that challenge everything we think we know about the ancient world. And in that challenge lies the beginning of a new understanding of human civilization itself. Close your eyes and imagine Alexandria in the 3rd century before Christ. The greatest city of the ancient world spreads along the Mediterranean coast like a jewel carved from marble and ambition. But this is not the Alexandria of flickering oil lamps and smoky torches that fills our history books. This is a city that hums with invisible energy. The great lighthouse of Alexandria rises 400 feet into the sky, its beacon visible from 30 miles at sea. But the light that guides ships safely to harbor doesn't come from burning wood or oil. It emanates from crystalline chambers at the lighthouse's apex, powered by copper conduits that run deep into the building's foundations, where they connect to networks of similar conduits spread throughout the city. Walk through the streets of this alternative Alexandria as evening falls. The merchants in the Agra don't light oil lamps to continue their trade. Instead, they twist copper switches embedded in marble columns, and steady, pale light floods their stalls. The light doesn't flicker with wind or dim with fuel consumption. It simply exists, constant as sunlight, but cooler, more ethereal. The great library of Alexandria glows from within as scholars work through the night. Not by candlelight that threatens precious papyrus with flame, but by the same steady illumination that allows them to read and write without eye strain, to preserve knowledge without the constant threat of fire. In the Palace District, fountains don't simply flow with water, they sparkle with lights embedded in their bases. turning evening gatherings into displays of controlled lightning dancing through cascading water. The wealthy compete not in the display of gold and silk, but in the artistry of their electrical installations, commissioning engineer priests to create ever more elaborate light sculptures for their gardens. The workshops of Alexandria buzz with activity that would be impossible by flame alone. Metalworkers shape gold and silver with precision tools that never grow too hot to hold. Glass blowers create vessels with walls, so thin they seem made of crystallized air, working with furnaces that maintain exact temperatures through electrical control rather than the guesswork of wood and coal. In the temples, the mysteries take on new meaning. The priests who guard the sacred technologies aren't simply performing rituals. They maintaining the complex systems that keep the city's energy flowing. Their training includes not just theology, but engineering, not just prayer, but the practical knowledge of how to repair and operate the devices that their predecessors built. The god Thoth, patron of knowledge and writing, is honored not just as the inventor of hieroglyphs, but as the divine engineer who first showed humans how to capture lightning and make it serve their needs. This Alexandria doesn't fear the darkness. When the sun sets over the Mediterranean, the city doesn't surrender to night, but transforms it, becoming something more beautiful and mysterious than it could ever be by day. The harbor glows with navigation lights that guide ships with mathematical precision. The streets remain as safe and active as they are at noon. The scholars who gather in the library's great halls can pursue their research regardless of season or weather. Mathematics and astronomy advance not despite the limitations of ancient technology, but because those limitations have been transcended. In this world, the burning of the Library of Alexandria becomes not just the loss of knowledge, but the destruction of the infrastructure that made such knowledge possible. When the lights go out, they take with them not just books and scrolls, but the very system that allowed such learning to flourish. The engineers and priest technicians who understood the electrical systems die in the chaos. Their apprentices scatter. The knowledge passes from living memory into myth, from practical reality into legend. Within generations, the copper conduits corrode. The generating chambers fill with sand. The crystalline light sources crack and dim until they produce nothing but silence. And the descendants of those who once lived in electric splendor find themselves lighting oil lamps and wondering at the strange artifacts their ancestors left behind, objects that look almost like bulbs, like switches, like the components of technologies they can no longer understand or operate. This alternative Alexandria fades back into history, leaving only traces, only fragments, only the persistent whisper that perhaps our ancestors achieved more than we've ever imagined, and that the darkness that followed wasn't inevitable, but imposed by catastrophe and forgetting. Open your eyes. The vision dissolves, but the questions remain. Every culture tells stories of fire that fell from heaven. The Greek titan Prometheus stole flame from the gods and gave it to humanity, transforming mortals from shivering creatures into masters of heat and light. But the fire Prometheus brought wasn't ordinary flame. It was divine fire, supernatural in its properties, capable of powers that normal combustion could never achieve. In Norse mythology, Thor's hammer generated lightning that could shatter mountains and bridges worlds. The god's chariot raced across the sky, its wheels sparking with electrical discharge that brought both destruction and fertility to the lands below. Hindu texts speak of Indra wielding Vajra, weapons of compressed lightning that could level armies and illuminate the darkness of ignorance itself. The Vedic hymns describe divine vehicles that moved without horses, powered by mysterious forces that made them shine like small suns. Mayan legends tell of Kukulkan descending from the sky in serpents of light, bringing knowledge that transformed primitive tribes into sophisticated civilizations capable of mathematical and astronomical achievements that still challenge modern understanding. These stories have been dismissed as mythology, as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena like lightning and fire, But what if there's something else entirely? What if they're cultural memories of real technologies, preserved in symbolic form across generations that no longer understood their literal meaning? Consider the consistency of these myths across cultures that had no contact with each other. From the Pacific Islands to the mountains of Peru, from the forests of ancient Germany to the deserts of Egypt, human societies independently developed stories of gods who controlled lightning of divine fire that behaved unlike any earthly flame of visitors who brought electrical knowledge from the heavens. The Hindu Ramayana describes Vimanas, flying vehicles that glowed with their own light and moved through the sky without visible means of propulsion. The texts provide technical details about their construction and operation that read remarkably like engineering manuals, complete with specifications for the metals to be used and the energy sources required. In ancient Ireland, the Tuatha Dé Danann were said to possess 4 magical treasures, including the Spear of Law that never missed its target and shone with its own inner light. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain ancient Celtic artifacts contained unexplained metallic alloys and showed signs of electrical activity that have never been adequately explained. The Aboriginal Australians speak of the rainbow serpent, a cosmic force that moved through the earth, creating landforms and bringing the rains that sustained life. But the serpent was also associated with lightning and with strange lights that danced across the landscape, suggesting that the mythology might preserve memories of electrical phenomena that early humans witnessed and tried to understand. Native American traditions across multiple tribes describe thunderbirds, massive creatures whose wings generated lightning and whose eyes flashed with electrical fire. The birds were said to battle underwater serpents in cosmic struggles that determined the fate of human civilization. Even the biblical account of Moses and the burning bush that was not consumed suggests an electrical phenomenon rather than ordinary fire. The bush glowed with light, but wasn't destroyed by combustion, exactly what we might expect from an electrical discharge or some form of contained plasma. The more closely we examine these myths, the more they seem to describe experiences with electrical phenomena that their tellers didn't have the vocabulary to explain in scientific terms. They used the language of divinity and magic because those were the only frameworks available for describing technologies that seemed to transcend natural law. But perhaps those technologies didn't transcend natural law at all. Perhaps they worked within physical principles that ancient civilizations understood in ways we've forgotten. The myths might be telling us that electricity isn't humanity's recent discovery, but our rediscovery. That the gods who brought fire from heaven weren't supernatural beings, but earlier human civilizations whose technological achievements seemed godlike to those who came after their fall. In this reading, mythology becomes archaeology, legend becomes oral history, and the stories that we've dismissed as primitive superstition reveal themselves as sophisticated attempts to preserve technological knowledge across dark ages that erased the context but couldn't completely destroy the memory. The fire of the gods might have been quite real indeed. And if we learn to read the myths correctly, they might show us the way back to capabilities our ancestors possessed, but we have yet to fully understand. In 1899, Nikola Tesla stood in his Colorado Springs laboratory, surrounded by equipment that seemed borrowed from the future. Copper coils towered around him like mechanical trees. Electrical discharges crackled through the air with the sound of controlled thunder. And in that charged atmosphere, Tesla began to glimpse possibilities that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations. But Tesla himself suspected that what he was discovering might not be entirely new. The great inventor often spoke of ancient wisdom, of knowledge that had been lost and was waiting to be rediscovered. He believed that the Earth itself was a vast electrical system, that wireless transmission of power was not just possible, but natural, and that earlier civilizations might have understood these principles long before his time. Tesla's wireless transmission experiments at Colorado Springs successfully lit electric bulbs placed 25 miles away from his laboratory, with no connecting wires. The power flowed through the Earth itself, using natural electrical properties that Tesla was only beginning to understand. When he described his vision of a world powered by wireless electricity, Tesla often referenced ancient sources. He spoke of Egyptian texts that described divine energy flowing through the earth, of Hindu scriptures that mentioned invisible forces connecting all living things, of Greek philosophers who theorized about universal principles that could be harnessed for human benefit. The tower Tesla built at Wardenclyffe on Long Island was designed not just to transmit electrical power wirelessly, but to tap into what he called the Earth's natural electrical charge. The tower's design, a metal sphere atop a tall spire with deep underground connections, bears a striking resemblance to descriptions of ancient structures in texts from cultures around the world. Tesla's notebooks contain sketches and calculations that reference not just contemporary physics, but ancient mathematical principles and geometric relationships that had been preserved in esoteric texts for centuries. He seemed to believe that he was not inventing wireless power transmission so much as rediscovering it. Consider the implications of Tesla's theories in light of ancient mysteries we've already explored. If the Great Pyramid was indeed designed as a power generation and transmission system, it would have operated on exactly the principles Tesla was investigating, using the Earth's natural electrical properties to generate and broadcast energy wirelessly. The pyramid's internal chambers, with their precise acoustic properties and radioactive granite construction, could have functioned as resonators, amplifying natural electrical frequencies in the same way Tesla's coils amplified artificially generated currents. The pyramid's vanished golden capstone would have served the same function as Tesla's metal sphere, a conductor designed to broadcast electrical energy into the atmosphere and through the Earth's natural electrical grid. Tesla's vision of a world powered by wireless electricity transmitted through natural earth currents matches remarkably well with ancient descriptions of divine energy flowing through ley lines, sacred sites, and temple networks that seem to follow geographic patterns that might have enhanced electrical transmission. Even Tesla's famous sensitivity to electrical fields, his ability to sense electromagnetic phenomena that others could undetect, echoes ancient accounts of priests and shamans who could feel the invisible forces that flowed through sacred sites and power objects. Tesla died before completing his wireless power transmission system, his research suppressed by financial interests that preferred the controllable, profitable model of centralized power generation and distribution. But his vision of abundant, freely available electrical energy transmitted without wires remains tantalizingly close to achievement. What is most intriguing is Tesla's own conviction that he was rediscovering ancient knowledge rather than breaking entirely new ground. In his later years, he spoke increasingly of human civilization as cyclical, of technological achievements that rose and fell like waves across history. He suggested that our modern electrical age might be the second time humanity had harnessed these forces, that earlier civilizations had achieved similar mastery of electrical principles before, being destroyed by catastrophe, war, or social collapse that sent survivors back to more primitive technologies. If Tesla was right, then his inventions weren't just anticipating the future, they were echoing the past. The wireless power transmission that he envisioned might have once illuminated ancient cities, powered prehistoric technologies, and connected early civilizations through invisible networks of Earth-carried energy. The tower at Wardenclyffe might have been not humanity's first attempt at wireless power transmission, but its most recent. And somewhere in the ruins of ancient civilizations, the remains of earlier towers might still wait to be recognized for what they truly were, not monuments to superstition, but evidence of a technological sophistication that we're only now beginning to rediscover. Tesla's echo of the past might be more literal than anyone imagined. Deep in the jungles of Guatemala, Mayan ruins guard secrets that archaeologists are reluctant to discuss in academic papers. Local guides whose families have lived in these forests for generations tell stories about certain stones in ancient temples that once glowed with their own inner light. Not the reflection of torches or the phosphorescence of organic decay, but a steady, cool radiance that could illuminate entire chambers. The stories might be dismissed as folklore, if not for one peculiar detail. Similar accounts appear in colonial Spanish records from the 16th century. Conquistador Hernan Cortes wrote to King Carlos V about temples in Tenochtitlan that contained stones that burned without fire, giving light as the sun gives light, but cold as the moon's face. Cortes ordered his soldiers to collect these stones, but they apparently lost their luminous properties once removed from their original settings. Francisco Vázquez de Coronado's expedition through what is now the American Southwest reported finding pueblos where certain chambers glowed as if lit by hidden flames that cast no heat. His chronicler noted that the native inhabitants seemed to understand the phenomenon but were reluctant to explain it to the Spanish explorers. Modern archaeological investigations have found traces of these mysterious luminous stones, though none that still function. Chemical analysis of stone samples from various Mesoamerican sites reveals unusual mineral compositions, particularly high concentrations of rare earth, elements that can exhibit luminescent properties under specific conditions. Some samples contain trace amounts of radium and other naturally radioactive materials that could theoretically produce a steady glow for centuries. Others show evidence of phosphorescent compounds that might have been artificially applied to stone surfaces using techniques that remain unknown. In the Mayan city of Palenque, the tomb of the ruler Pacal contains jade artifacts that show signs of having once been luminescent. The jade has been carved and treated with substances that left chemical signatures suggesting an attempt to enhance its natural properties. Modern attempts to recreate the process have failed, suggesting that the ancient techniques involved principles we don't fully understand. The Olmec civilization, which preceded the Maya by over 1,000 years, left behind polished obsidian mirrors that local legends claim once held sunlight captive and could illuminate dark spaces long after sunset. Archaeological analysis shows that these mirrors contain microscopic structures that could theoretically store and release light energy, though no working examples have been discovered. At the Aztec site of Teotihuacan, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent contains chambers lined with mica, a mineral known for its electrical properties. The mica sheets are precisely cut and positioned in ways that serve no apparent structural or decorative function, but that would create ideal conditions for electrical phenomena, including certain types of luminescence. Perhaps most intriguingly, several Mayan codices contain hieroglyphic passages that seem to describe the creation and maintenance of luminous stones. The texts reference specific rituals, particular astronomical alignments, and the use of certain plant and mineral substances and processes that sound remarkably like ancient chemistry or physics experiments. The glowing stones of Mesoamerica might represent a lost technology that combined natural luminescent materials with techniques for enhancing and controlling their light-producing properties. Whether through radioluminescence, phosphorescence, or some other phenomenon we haven't identified, ancient American civilizations appears to have achieved a mastery of controlled lighting that didn't require fire. The stones went dark centuries ago, their secrets dying with the civilizations that created them. But they left behind traces chemical signatures in jade and obsidian, architectural features designed to house luminous objects, and persistent legends that refuse to be dismissed as pure mythology. Somewhere in the relationship between rare earth elements, electromagnetic fields, and organic compounds that the ancient Americans understood, there may be principles of light generation that we're only beginning to rediscover. The glowing stones remind us that technology doesn't always follow the paths we expect. Sometimes it takes forms so different from our own solutions that we don't recognize it as technology at all. And sometimes the most incredible facts are hidden in the stories we're most tempted to dismiss as impossible. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera rises from the Egyptian desert like a statement carved in stone. Built during the Ptolemaic period, around the 1st century BC, it contains some of the most perfectly preserved artwork and inscriptions in all of Egypt. But it also contains something that shouldn't exist: detailed stone reliefs that look remarkably like modern electrical diagrams. The carvings in question appear in a series of crypts beneath the main temple, chambers that were sealed for centuries before archaeologists rediscovered them in the 19th century. The reliefs show human figures manipulating what appear to be large bulb-shaped objects connected to braided cables. These bulbs emerge from lotus flowers and contain wavy lines that look exactly like the electrical discharge patterns we see in modern vacuum tubes. The figures handling these devices wear what appear to be protective garments and stand on objects that resemble modern electrical insulators. The entire scene is presided over by Egyptian gods, who seem to be supervising or directing the operation of what can only be described as an electrical apparatus. Mainstream Egyptology interprets these images as purely mythological religious scenes depicting the daily journey of the sun god, Ra, through the underworld, with the bulbs representing the moment of sunrise when divine light emerges from the darkness. The cables, they argue, are stylized depictions of serpents or sacred ropes. The entire scene is symbolic rather than technological, but the details resist comfortable symbolic interpretation. The objects depicted have all the visual characteristics of electrical devices: bulb-shaped vacuum chambers, connecting cables with a braided appearance that matches ancient descriptions of copper wire construction, insulators that separate the operators from direct contact with the devices, and discharge patterns that follow the physics of electrical arcing rather than the artistic conventions of Egyptian religious art. Engineer and Egyptologist researcher Christopher Dunn has noted that the proportions and relationships between the elements in these reliefs match those found in modern electrical circuit diagrams. The positioning of insulators, the connection points of cables, and the apparent flow direction of energy all follow principles that wouldn't be understood by artists creating purely symbolic images. Other Egyptian sites contain similar imagery. At Edfu, wall carvings show priests manipulating objects that look like switches or control panels. At Abu Simbel, reliefs depict figures holding devices that cast rays of light in precisely defined beams, unlike the diffuse illumination typically shown in Egyptian art when representing torches or oil lamps. The consistency of these electrical-looking images across multiple sites and time periods suggests either a shared, symbolic system that happened to resemble modern electrical devices, or actual familiarity with electrical technology that was represented as accurately as ancient artistic conventions allowed. Some researchers have noted that the Dendera reliefs appear in crypts that were specifically designed to be dark spaces, chambers where conventional lighting would have been problematic due to limited ventilation and fire safety concerns. If these spaces were actually illuminated by electrical devices, it would explain both the presence of the reliefs and their location in areas where such technology would have been most necessary. The ancient Egyptian language contains words that do and translate easily into modern terms, but that seem to describe technological concepts. The hieroglyphic symbol Ankh has been translated as life, but could also represent a type of energy or power source. The Djed pillar, found throughout Egyptian art and architecture, resembles the insulators shown in the Dendera reliefs and might represent actual technological devices rather than purely religious symbols. Perhaps most intriguingly, chemical analysis of the Dendera temple walls has revealed traces of electrical activity, microscopic evidence of electrical discharge that has left characteristic patterns in the stone itself. These traces could be the result of natural phenomena, but they could also be evidence that electrical devices were actually operated in these chambers. The debate over the Dendera light bulbs highlights a fundamental challenge in interpreting ancient artifacts. How do we distinguish between symbolic representation and technological documentation when we are re-examining cultures whose scientific knowledge might have taken forms we don't recognize? The carvings themselves remain unchanged, neither proving nor disproving the electrical interpretation. They simply exist, showing human figures manipulating devices that look exactly like the lighting technology we use today, created by people who supposedly had no knowledge of electrical principles. Whether religious symbol or technical manual, the Dendera reliefs force us to confront the possibility that our understanding of ancient Egyptian capabilities might be far more limited than their actual achievements. And in that confrontation, new possibilities emerge for understanding not just Egyptian civilization, but the entire trajectory of human technological development. 4,500 years ago, in the valleys of the Indus River, a civilization emerged that would challenge every assumption about ancient urban planning and engineering capabilities. The Harappan civilization stretched across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, encompassing cities that housed hundreds of thousands of people in conditions that would not be matched again until the modern era. These weren't the chaotic, disease-ridden settlements we often imagine when we think of prehistoric urban life. They were engineering marvels. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro featured sophisticated water supply systems with covered drains, public baths, and individual household plumbing that functioned better than most medieval European cities would achieve 3,000 years later. The streets were laid out in perfect grids, with standardized brick sizes used throughout the entire civilization. But the most mysterious aspect of Harappan engineering wasn't what they built, it was how uniform it all was. Across hundreds of miles and numerous cities, the Harappans maintained identical weights and measures, standardized brick dimensions, and consistent urban planning principles. This level of standardization suggests a centralized system of technical knowledge and communication that seems impossible without some form of rapid information transmission across vast distances. How did engineers in cities hundreds of miles apart coordinate their construction projects with such precision? How did they maintain consistent technical standards across an empire larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined? The conventional answer involves trade networks and gradual cultural diffusion, but the evidence suggests something more immediate, more coordinated than that explanation allows. Archaeological excavation of Harappan sites has revealed sophisticated metallurgy that produced bronze alloys of remarkable consistency and quality. The civilization's artisans created jewelry and tools using techniques that required precise temperature control and chemical knowledge that wouldn't be formally understood until modern chemistry developed. Perhaps most intriguingly, many Harappan sites show evidence of geometric planning based on mathematical principles that suggest advanced understanding of engineering and physics. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro is constructed with a precision that indicates sophisticated knowledge of hydraulics, material science, and structural engineering. The civilization's sewage systems were more advanced than anything found in Europe until the 19th century. Every house was connected to covered drains that carried waste outside the city walls, where it was treated in settling ponds that used principles of biochemical waste processing. But despite all this technological sophistication, the Harappan civilization remains deeply mysterious. Their writing system has never been deciphered. They left behind no obvious religious monuments, no palaces, no evidence of the kind of hierarchical political structure that we associate with other ancient civilizations. Yet they coordinated massive public works projects across a subcontinental area with efficiency that suggests almost instantaneous communication and control systems. Could the Harappans have developed electrical communication technologies that allowed them to coordinate their far-flung cities? Could their mysterious standardization be explained by technological capabilities that we haven't recognized in the archaeological record? Some researchers have noted that Harappan sites contain unusual concentrations of copper and other conductive metals, often arranged in patterns that don't correspond to obvious functional needs like plumbing or decoration. These metal installations could represent the remains of communication or power distribution systems that we do and recognize as technological artifacts. The civilization's sudden and mysterious decline around 1900 BC adds another layer to the mystery. Cities that had flourished for centuries were apparently abandoned rapidly, with no clear evidence of conquest, natural disaster, or gradual decay. It's as if the technological systems that held the civilization together simply stopped functioning, leaving behind impressive ruins, but no explanation for how they had been maintained or why they failed. The Harappan civilization challenges our assumptions about the relationship between technology and civilization. Their achievements suggest technical capabilities that seem to require infrastructure and knowledge, systems that haven't survived in any recognizable form. But perhaps that's our limitation rather than theirs. Perhaps the Harappans developed technologies that worked so differently from our own that we don't recognize their remains as technological artifacts. Their mysterious uniformity across vast distances, their sophisticated urban planning, and their sudden disappearance suggest a civilization that had mastered challenges of coordination and communication that we only now beginning to solve with modern electronics. The forgotten engineers of the Indus Valley may have been more advanced than we've ever imagined, and their techniques for organizing complex technological civilizations may hold lessons that we're only beginning to understand. Before humans learned to make fire, they watched lightning split the sky with divine fury. The electrical discharge that dances between storm clouds and earth carries more energy than any early civilization could have imagined controlling. A single lightning bolt contains roughly 5 billion joules of energy, enough to power an average home for months, delivered in microseconds of brilliant, crackling violence. But lightning is also predictable. It follows patterns, seeks specific paths, returns to the same locations again and again. And throughout human history, certain places have been known as lightning magnets, mountain peaks, tall trees, metal deposits, and structures that seem to call electrical discharge from the sky. Ancient peoples noticed these patterns long before they understood the physics behind them. They built temples on mountaintops where lightning struck regularly. They erected stone circles that incorporated metal elements and were positioned to attract electrical discharge. They created rituals around storms, gathering at specific locations when the atmospheric conditions were right for lightning generation. Were they simply worshiping natural forces they couldn't understand? Or were they attempting something more sophisticated, trying to harness the most powerful electrical generator in nature? Consider the megalithic structures scattered across the ancient world. Stonehenge, with its massive trilithons and careful astronomical alignments, sits on ground with unusual electrical properties. The stones themselves contain high concentrations of metallic elements, and the monument's design seems almost perfectly configured to attract and channel lightning strikes. Archaeological evidence suggests that Stonehenge has been struck by lightning repeatedly throughout its existence, leaving characteristic electromagnetic signatures in the stone itself. Rather than being damaged by these strikes, the monument appears to have been designed to accommodate them. The oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece delivered prophecies from a chamber that was struck by lightning so frequently that the Greeks considered it a direct telephone line to Zeus. The chamber's positioning, its metal fixtures, and its relationship to underground water sources created conditions that made lightning strikes almost inevitable during storms. Native American medicine wheels across the Great Plains were often built with metal elements and positioned on elevated ground in ways that maximized their exposure to lightning during the thunderstorms that swept across the grasslands. Tribal traditions speak of these sites as places where sky fire could be captured and transformed into spiritual power. The Norse god Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, was said to both generate lightning and return to Thor's hand after being thrown. This might represent a garbled memory of actual lightning rods or electrical devices that could channel and redirect natural electrical discharge for practical purposes. Ancient texts from cultures around the world describe techniques for calling down the fire of heaven during storms. These accounts often include specific details about metal objects, elevated positions, and timing that sound remarkably like early attempts at controlled lightning attraction. Benjamin Franklin's famous kite experiment in 1752 proved that lightning was electrical in nature and could be safely controlled with proper equipment. But Franklin was building on knowledge that had been accumulating for centuries among people who worked with lightning on a regular basis ships. Crews who understood the protective value of metal rods, mountain dwellers who knew which peaks to avoid during storms, and craftsmen who had noticed the relationship between metal objects and lightning strikes. Could ancient civilizations have developed more sophisticated lightning capture systems? Could they have learned to store the enormous energy of lightning strikes in some form that could be used for practical purposes? The technical challenges are immense. Lightning generates voltages of up to 1 billion volts and temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. Controlling such forces requires materials and techniques that seem beyond ancient capabilities. But perhaps that assumption reveals our own limitations rather than theirs. Perhaps ancient engineers found ways to work with lightning as natural properties rather than trying to control them directly. If they could predict when and where lightning would strike, they could position devices to capture some portion of its energy. If they could understand the electrical properties of different materials, they could build systems that channeled lightning safely while extracting useful power. The stone circles, temples, and sacred sites that dot the ancient world might represent humanity's first electrical infrastructure, network of lightning collectors that provided the energy for technologies we no longer understand. And the gods of thunder and lightning might have been not supernatural beings, but the patron deities of humanity's earliest electrical engineers. In the mountains of ancient Magnesia, Greek shepherds noticed something extraordinary about certain stones scattered across the hillsides. These dark, metallic rocks could attract iron with invisible force. They could make iron needles dance without being touched. They could transfer their mysterious power to other metals, creating chains of attraction that seemed to defy the natural order. The Greeks called these stones magnetes, lithos, the stone of Magnesia, giving us our modern word magnet. But to ancient minds, these stones represented something far more profound than a curious natural phenomenon. They were proof that invisible forces flowed through the material world. Lodestones, as these naturally magnetized pieces of magnetite came to be known, appeared in cultures around the world wherever iron ore deposits existed. Chinese texts from the 4th century BC describe magnetic compasses used for navigation. Hindu scriptures mention divine stones that could guide travelers across vast distances without stars or landmarks. But magnetism offered more than navigation. It provided the first glimpse into the relationship between electricity and invisible force that would eventually transform human civilization. Ancient metalworkers noticed that iron tools sometimes became magnetic after being struck by lightning. Blacksmiths working near lodestone deposits found that their hammers and tongs developed the ability to attract iron filings. Chinese alchemists discovered that heating certain iron objects in specific ways could create artificial magnets. These observations suggested that magnetism wasn't simply a property of certain rare stones, but a force that could be transferred, controlled, and artificially created. The implications were revolutionary. If invisible forces could be transferred from stone to metal, what other invisible forces might exist in nature? If magnetism could be artificially created, what other natural phenomena might be reproduced and controlled through human intervention? Ancient texts hint at sophisticated understanding of magnetic properties that goes far beyond simple compass navigation. Chinese documents describe magnetic devices used in construction, positioning heavy stones with precision that would be difficult to achieve even with modern equipment. Egyptian texts mention sacred stones that could make iron dance and were used in temple ceremonies that might have involved more than symbolic magnetism. Some researchers have suggested that certain Egyptian artifacts show evidence of having been magnetized in ways that wouldn't occur naturally, implying deliberate magnetic manipulation. The relationship between magnetism and electricity wouldn't be formally understood until Michael Faraday's experiments in the 1830s proved that moving magnetic fields generate electrical current, and that electrical current creates magnetic fields. But evidence suggests that ancient metalworkers might have observed this relationship empirically, even if they couldn't explain it theoretically. Viking navigation techniques involved lodestones and iron needles, but some Norse sagas describe navigation stones with properties that go beyond simple magnetism. They speak of stones that could find direction even when the sun and stars were hidden, stones that glowed with their own light, and stones that could speak across vast distances to other similar stones. These descriptions sound like fantasy until we consider that magnetic fields do interact with electrical phenomena in ways that can create light, sound, and long-distance effects under the right conditions. Ancient Chinese texts describe magnetic experiments that involve not just iron needles and lodestones, but copper, silver, and other materials arranged in complex patterns that seem designed to create or amplify magnetic effects. Some of these arrangements resemble the coils and conductors used in modern electrical generators and motors. The mystery deepens when we consider that magnetism and electricity are fundamentally the same phenomenon, electromagnetic force expressed in different ways. Ancient peoples who understood magnetism were already working with the same forces that power our modern electrical civilization. They just approached them from a different direction. If ancient metalworkers could create artificial magnets, manipulate magnetic fields, and use magnetic forces for navigation and construction, they were already manipulating electromagnetic energy. The step from controlled magnetism to controlled electricity involves understanding the relationship between motion and electromagnetic fields knowledge that ancient engineers might have discovered through experimentation with lodestones and metal coils. The magnetic compass that guided ships across ancient oceans might have been just the beginning of electromagnetic technologies that we haven't recognized in the archaeological record. And the mysterious properties of lodestones might have been the key that unlocked electrical knowledge that transformed ancient civilizations in ways we are only beginning to understand. Imagine standing on a hill overlooking the valley where Babylon once spread like a jeweled carpet beneath the stars. But this is not the Babylon of history books, lit by scattered oil lamps and the occasional torch. This is a city that mirrors the night sky above, each light below reflecting a star above, creating a harmony between heaven and earth that speaks of technologies we've lost to time. The great ziggurat rises in the city center like a stepped mountain crowned with light, not the flickering orange of fire, but a steady, cool radiance that pulses gently in rhythm with forces flowing deep beneath the earth. The light seems to breathe with the city itself, growing brighter as the evening activities intensify, dimming toward dawn as the inhabitants rest. Streets radiate outward from the ziggurat in perfect geometric patterns, each lined with smaller lights that never require fuel, never need tending, never fail unless the delicate balance that maintains them is disrupted. The lights follow the same patterns as the copper traces that run beneath the paved stones, a network of conductive pathways that carries energy from the central, generating chamber to every corner of the city. In the residential quarters, families gather in rooms illuminated by gentle, steady light that doesn't smoke or produce heat. Children study scrolls and clay tablets by illumination that doesn't strain their eyes. Merchants conduct business well into the night without concern for fire or fuel costs. The workshops of the city operate around the clock, producing goods with precision that would be impossible by firelight alone. Metal workers shape bronze and gold with tools that maintain exact temperatures. Glassblowers create vessels of impossible delicacy working with furnaces that respond to subtle controls rather than the crude adjustments possible with wood and charcoal. Along the river, docks extend into the water marked by navigation lights that guide boats safely to harbor. The lights reflect off the water like fallen stars, creating paths of illumination that can be seen for miles upstream and downstream. But the true marvel becomes visible only from the hilltop perspective, when the entire city spreads below like a vast electrical circuit made manifest in stone and light. The pattern of streets and buildings follows the same geometric principles as the copper networks that power them. The city itself has been designed as a massive technological system, every structure positioned to optimize the flow of energy from the central source to the furthest corners. The ziggurat serves not just as a temple, but as the control center for the entire system. Priest engineers monitor the flow of power through crystal displays that show the electrical state of every district. They adjust the output of generating chambers to match the city's needs, balancing the load to ensure that every lamp burns with steady light. The knowledge required to build and maintain such a system spans generations. Young apprentices study not just religious texts, but engineering manuals that describe the principles of electrical flow, the properties of conductive materials, and the maintenance procedures required to keep the ancient devices functioning. The city's library contains scrolls that document centuries of electrical experimentation, detailing the discoveries that made the lighting system possible and the techniques required to expand it as the city grows. But as dawn approaches and the artificial lights dim to conserve power for the day's activities, shadows begin to creep across the hillside. Not the shadows of night giving way to day, but darker shadows, the shadows of catastrophe approaching. Wars rage in distant lands. Climate shifts threaten the agricultural systems that support the city's population. Political upheavals challenge the stability that has allowed such sophisticated technologies to flourish. The priest engineers know that their electrical civilization is more fragile than it appears. The knowledge required to maintain it exists in the minds of a relative few. The materials needed for repairs grow scarce as trade routes become dangerous. The social order that supports technological specialization comes under increasing pressure from external threats. One day, perhaps within a generation, the lights will go out, the copper networks will corrode, the generating chambers will fall silent, and the descendants of those who once lived in electric splendor will huddle around fires, telling stories about the time when their ancestors commanded lightning and made the night as bright as day. The vision fades as dawn breaks over the ancient valley. The ruins of historical Babylon emerge in the growing light, impressive still, but dark, empty, showing no trace of the electrical marvel that might once have been. But the questions remain. And in those questions, possibility glimmers like stars reflected in water. Of all the lost civilizations that haunt human imagination, none captures our fascination quite like Atlantis. Plato's account, recorded in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias around 360 BC, describes an island empire of extraordinary technological sophistication. The Atlanteans possessed advanced metallurgy, controlled mechanical devices of incredible complexity, and had mastered architectural techniques that allowed them to build on a scale that dwarfed contemporary civilizations. But what is most intriguing about Plato's Atlantis isn't its military might or political organization. It is the suggestion that the Atlanteans had harnessed natural forces in ways that their contemporaries couldn't understand. Plato describes Atlantean temples that glowed with inner light, machines that operated without visible power sources, and communication systems that allowed instantaneous contact across vast distances. These details are often dismissed as philosophical allegory, but they read remarkably like descriptions of an electrically powered civilization. The central island of Atlantis, according to Plato's account, was arranged in concentric rings of land and water, with massive walls that incorporated different metals in specific patterns. This arrangement sounds like a description of a colossal electrical device, concentric conductors separated by insulating materials, designed to generate or channel enormous amounts of electrical energy. The Atlanteans' mastery of metallurgy included the production of orichalcum, a mysterious metal that Plato describes as second only to gold in value and possessing unique properties that made it essential to Atlantean technology. Modern attempts to identify orichalcum have failed, but its description matches what we might expect from a superconductor or other exotic electrical material. Perhaps most significantly, Plato's account suggests that Atlantean civilization was destroyed by its own power. The same forces that had elevated the Atlanteans above all other peoples eventually became the instrument of their destruction, suggesting a technology powerful enough to reshape continents, but too dangerous to control indefinitely. Could Atlantis have been an electrical civilization that achieved mastery of forces we are only now beginning to understand? The idea gains credibility when we consider the global distribution of flood myths and catastrophe stories that seem to describe the same event from different perspectives. Cultures around the world preserve legends of a great civilization that was destroyed by water, fire, and earth-shaking forces, often specifically mentioning that the civilization's technological achievements contributed to its downfall. Hindu texts describe the destruction of advanced cities by weapons that sound remarkably like electrical devices, weapons that generated light brighter than the sun and heat that could melt stone. Mayan codices tell of civilizations that mastered forces of nature, but were destroyed when those forces turned against them. Even the biblical account of the flood includes details that suggest electrical phenomena, descriptions of the fountains of the great deep breaking up and the windows of heaven opening, language that could describe massive electrical discharge between Earth and atmosphere. If Atlantis was indeed an electrical civilization, its destruction might have been caused by the same forces it had learned to harness. Massive electrical experiments could have triggered seismic activity, destabilized weather patterns, or created electromagnetic phenomena that disrupted the planet's natural systems. The sudden collapse of such a technologically advanced civilization would explain several persistent mysteries in archaeology and geology. It could account for the apparent technological regression that occurred around 12,000 years ago, when sophisticated prehistoric cultures seem to have suddenly vanished or reverted to more primitive lifestyles. It might explain the global presence of megalithic structures built with techniques that later civilizations couldn't replicate if these structures were built by Atlantean colonies or civilizations that had learned Atlantean electrical technologies. Most intriguingly, it could explain the persistent legends of advanced prehistoric civilizations that appear in cultures around the world. If Atlantis was real and electrical, its influence would have extended far beyond its physical borders through trade, colonization, and technological transmission. The Atlantean current, both electrical and cultural, might have flowed through ancient civilizations in ways that we only now beginning to recognize. The electrical technologies that we think of as modern discoveries might be rediscoveries of Atlantean achievements that were lost in the catastrophe Plato described. Modern searches for Atlantis have focused on finding the physical remains of Plato's island civilization. But perhaps the real evidence of Atlantis lies not in sunken cities, but in the electrical artifacts, ancient texts, and technological anomalies that suggest prehistoric mastery of electromagnetic forces. If Atlantis existed as an electrical civilization, its legacy survives not in ruins, but in the traces of advanced technology that appear throughout the ancient world, traces that make sense only if we assume that sophisticated electrical knowledge existed long before our conventional timeline suggests it was possible. The Atlantean current may still flow through our understanding of human history, waiting to be recognized and decoded. Deep in the jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, Mayan pyramids rise like geometric mountains designed to capture something more than the devotion of worshippers. The Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza demonstrates a mathematical precision that seems to serve functions beyond religious symbolism. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, shadows cast by the pyramid-stepped sides create the illusion of a serpent descending. The northern staircase, a light display that requires exact understanding of solar angles, architectural geometry, and the relationship between structure and stellar mechanics. But this famous shadow serpent might represent something more sophisticated than astronomical theater. The Maya were obsessed with solar phenomena to a degree that suggests practical rather than purely spiritual interest. Their calendars tracked solar cycles with accuracy that wouldn't be matched by European astronomy until the development of modern telescopes. They predicted solar eclipses centuries in advance and built architectural complexes specifically designed to mark and measure solar events with extraordinary precision. Why such intense focus on the sun's behavior, unless they were attempting to harness solar energy for practical purposes? Mayan temples incorporate architectural features that seem designed to collect, concentrate, and channel solar radiation in ways that go beyond symbolic sun worship. The positioning of reflective surfaces, the angles of temple walls, and the arrangement of courtyards and chambers all suggest systems designed to manipulate solar energy. At Palenque, the Temple of Inscriptions contains chambers lined with polished stone that focuses sunlight in patterns that change throughout the day and across seasons. The mathematical precision required to create these light effects suggests engineering knowledge that was being applied to practical solar energy manipulation. The Mayan creation mythology centers on the hero twins who journey to the underworld and defeat the lords of darkness through their mastery of light and fire. But these myths might encode memories of actual technological achievements rather than purely spiritual allegories. Mayan texts describe the hero twins as creators of artificial suns devices that could bring daylight to dark places and provide heat without fuel. These descriptions sound remarkably like accounts of solar energy collection and concentration systems. Archaeological evidence supports the possibility of sophisticated Mayan solar technology. Excavations at various sites have uncovered polished obsidian and metal mirrors arranged in complex patterns that would focus sunlight with remarkable efficiency. Some of these mirror systems could theoretically concentrate enough solar energy to achieve temperatures suitable for metallurgy or even electrical generation through thermoelectric effects. The Mayan understanding of crystal properties was extraordinarily advanced. They worked with quartz crystals in ways that suggest knowledge of piezoelectric effects, the ability of certain crystals to generate electrical charges when subjected to pressure or temperature changes. Solar energy concentrated through mirror systems could create the temperature differentials needed to generate electrical charges in properly configured crystal arrays. The Maya might have developed solar-powered electrical systems that used principles we're only now rediscovering. Their mathematical achievements support this possibility. Mayan astronomers calculated solar and planetary cycles with accuracy that suggests they were working with observational instruments of remarkable precision. The development of such instruments would require sophisticated understanding of optics, metallurgy, and precision manufacturing techniques. The sudden abandonment of major Mayan cities around 900 AD is one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Cities that had flourished for centuries were simply abandoned, with no clear evidence of conquest, disease, or gradual decline. Could this abandonment be related to the failure of solar energy systems that had supported Mayan civilization? Climate records suggest that the abandonment period coincided with unusual weather patterns and reduced solar intensity that might have disrupted solar-based technologies. If the Maya had indeed developed solar electrical systems, changes in atmospheric conditions or solar output could have rendered their technology ineffective, forcing them to abandon cities that had become dependent on solar power for essential functions. The persistence of solar worship throughout Mesoamerican civilizations, from the Olmecs through the Aztecs, suggests a continuous tradition of practical solar energy utilization rather than purely symbolic sun worship. Modern attempts to recreate Mayan solar focusing systems have achieved remarkable results, concentrating enough solar energy to melt metals and generate substantial heat. The Maya might have achieved similar results on a much larger scale, using their temple complexes as massive solar power plants that provided energy for urban populations. The sun god Kinech Ahau, central to Mayan religion, might have represented not just spiritual reverence for solar energy, but practical gratitude for the technological systems that harnessed that energy for human benefit. And the elaborate ceremonies conducted in Mayan temples might have been not just religious rituals, but maintenance procedures for sophisticated solar energy systems that required precise timing, careful adjustment, and specialized knowledge to operate effectively. The Maya's solar obsession might reveal them as pioneers in renewable energy technology, masters of solar power who achieved sustainable civilization through harmony between architectural engineering and natural forces. In 1851, railroad workers cutting through a hillside near Dorchester, Massachusetts, made a discovery that geologists still can't adequately explain. Blasting through solid rock that dated to the Precambrian era over 600 million years old, they uncovered a metallic vessel of unknown origin. The bell-shaped artifact was composed of zinc and silver alloy, decorated with intricate floral inlays of pure silver, and crafted with a precision that suggested advanced metallurgical techniques. But the vessel's existence in rock formations that predated complex life on Earth by hundreds of millions of years posed questions that conventional geology couldn't answer. The Dorchester vessel wasn't alone. Similar anomalous metallic artifacts have been discovered in geological contexts that place them far outside accepted timeline of human technological development. In 1885, an iron cube was found embedded in coal that formed during the Carboniferous period, over 300 million years ago. In 1912, employees at an electric plant in Oklahoma discovered an iron pot inside a chunk of coal that dated to the same impossibly ancient era. Perhaps most intriguingly, in 1961, collectors found a spark plug-like artifact inside a 500,000-year-old geode A crystalline formation that would have taken millennia to form around any embedded object. These discoveries might be dismissed as hoaxes or misidentified modern objects if not for one consistent detail. Many of them show evidence of sophisticated electrical properties. The iron artifacts often contain metallic compositions that wouldn't be developed until the 19th century, including trace elements that enhance electrical conductivity. Some show signs of having been electroplated, a process that was invented until 1805, but that requires sophisticated understanding of electrical chemistry. The most mysterious examples are metallic wires and threads that have been discovered in various archaeological contexts worldwide. These aren't the crude metalworking attempts we might expect from ancient civilizations, but precisely manufactured conductors with properties that suggest advanced electrical applications. In Egypt, tomb excavations have uncovered gold threads so fine they're barely visible to the naked eye, woven into fabrics and patterns that serve no apparent decorative purpose. Chemical analysis reveals that these threads have been treated with substances that enhance their electrical conductivity beyond the natural properties of pure gold. At various Mesopotamian sites, archaeologists have found copper wires embedded in ceramic objects in configurations that resemble modern electrical circuits. The wires show evidence of having been drawn through dies, a manufacturing technique that produces uniform diameter and electrical properties, but that supposedly wasn't developed until the medieval period. Perhaps most remarkable are the metallic mesh fabrics discovered at several South American archaeological sites. These textiles incorporate metal threads woven in geometric patterns that would create electrical fields if subjected to current. The precision of the weaving and the mathematical relationships between the metal threads suggest sophisticated understanding of electromagnetic principles. Some researchers have noted that certain ancient jewelry shows evidence of electroplating, the deposition of thin metallic layers using electrical current. The technique produces characteristic surface patterns and metal grain structures that are difficult to achieve through other methods. If ancient civilizations possessed electroplating technology, they must have also possessed electrical current sources capable of supporting the chemical processes involved. The Baghdad battery type devices we've already explored could theoretically provide such current, but only if they were used as part of larger electrical systems. The mystery deepens when we consider that many of these anomalous metallic artifacts have been found in contexts that suggest they were components of larger technological systems rather than isolated objects. Wires imply circuits. Electroplated surfaces suggest electrical manufacturing processes. Conductive threads woven into specific patterns indicate applications that required controlled electrical properties. Modern attempts to replicate some of these ancient metallic techniques have failed, suggesting that the manufacturing methods involved principles or materials that we don't fully understand. The gold-plated wires and electroplated artifacts scattered through archaeological sites around the world might represent fragments of electrical technologies that were once common but are now lost to catastrophe and forgetting. They remind us that metallurgy and electricity have always been intimately connected, and that ancient peoples who mastered sophisticated metalworking might also have mastered electrical applications that we only now rediscovering. The wires wait in museum storage rooms and private collections, silent testimony to capabilities that challenge our understanding of technological development. And in their silence, they pose questions about the relationship between ancient knowledge and modern rediscovery that may never be fully answered. Across every continent, in every culture, the same stories emerge with startling consistency. Gods descend from the sky in vehicles of fire and light. Divine beings wield weapons that generate lightning and thunder. Celestial visitors bring knowledge of forces that transform primitive tribes into sophisticated civilizations capable of architectural and technological achievements that seem impossible for their supposed level of development. These stories have been interpreted as mythology, as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena, or as religious allegories designed to teach moral lessons. But the consistency of the details across cultures that had no contact with each other suggests something more literal might be preserved in these ancient accounts. Consider the biblical description of Ezekiel's vision. I looked, and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. Ezekiel goes on to describe wheels within wheels, beings that moved with the sound of rushing waters and powerful wings, and a throne above the creatures that blazed with light. The entire vision is accompanied by electromagnetic phenomena, flashing lights, rushing sounds, and an overwhelming presence that suggests advanced technology rather than purely spiritual manifestation. Similar descriptions appear in Hindu texts, where the Vimana's divine flying vehicles are described with technical precision that reads like engineering manuals. The Vaimanika Shastra provides specifications for different types of aircraft, including their power sources, navigation systems, and defensive capabilities. These aren't vague mythological descriptions, but detailed technical documentation that includes information about metallurgy, aerodynamics, and energy systems that shouldn't exist in ancient texts unless the authors had direct experience with advanced technology. The Ramayana describes weapons called Brahmastra that could destroy entire armies with directed energy, creating effects that sound remarkably like modern descriptions of laser or particle beam weapons. The text provides specific details about their construction, operation, and the devastating effects of their use. Native American traditions speak of star people who traveled in vehicles that moved without making sound, who possessed tools that could cut through stone as if it were soft clay, and who demonstrated mastery of forces that the tribes could only describe as supernatural. The Hopi prophecies include detailed descriptions of flying shields and objects that move through the sky, bringing both knowledge and destruction, descriptions that match remarkably well with modern accounts of unidentified aerial phenomena. Ancient Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as beings who came from the sky with knowledge of metallurgy, agriculture, and engineering that transformed human civilization. The cuneiform tablets provide specific details about their aircraft, their tools, and their ability to manipulate natural forces in ways that seemed godlike to human observers. But perhaps these beings weren't supernatural gods at all. Perhaps they were representatives of human civilizations that had achieved technological capabilities so advanced that they seemed divine to less developed cultures. If earlier human civilizations had indeed mastered electrical technology, developed aircraft, and achieved industrial capabilities, their representatives would have seemed like gods to tribal societies, still using stone tools and living in primitive shelters. The electrical technologies we've been exploring throughout this journey, the power generation systems and pyramids, the wireless transmission networks that Tesla envisioned, the sophisticated metallurgy and manufacturing techniques preserved in ancient artifacts, could represent the technological heritage of these godlike civilizations. The cosmic power wielded by ancient gods might have been quite literally cosmic electrical energy drawn from atmospheric phenomena, solar radiation, and electromagnetic fields that advanced civilizations learned to harness for practical applications. The weapons of the gods that could level mountains and destroy armies might have been directed energy devices that used concentrated electromagnetic radiation or plasma generation techniques that we are only now beginning to develop. The vehicles that carried gods across the sky might have been aircraft powered by electrical propulsion systems that worked with electromagnetic principles we don't fully understand, but that earlier civilizations had mastered. The knowledge that gods brought to human civilization, metallurgy, agriculture, mathematics, astronomy might represent the practical education provided by technologically advanced human societies to their less developed contemporaries. In this interpretation, the gods were unsupernatural beings, but earlier humans whose technological achievements were so impressive that they became the stuff of legend and religious worship. The cosmic power they wielded was real electrical and electromagnetic energy that they had learned to generate, control, and apply for purposes that ranged from practical tools to devastating weapons. And their disappearance from human history might represent not the end of divine intervention, but the collapse of technological civilizations that left behind only fragments of their achievements and garbled memories of their capabilities. The gods might be waiting to be rediscovered, not in the heavens, but in the archaeological evidence of prehistoric electrical civilizations that achieved mastery of cosmic forces long before our current technological age began. Imagine a world where electrical civilization flourished for millennia, where cities glowed with artificial light, where communication networks spanned continents, where transportation systems operated on principles we're only now rediscovering. Then imagine it all disappearing within a generation. The catastrophe theory suggests that advanced prehistoric civilizations did indeed achieve electrical technology, but that their achievements were erased by cataclysmic events that reset human development to primitive levels and left behind only fragmentary evidence of what once was. Geological evidence supports the possibility of such catastrophic resets in human history. The Younger Dryas period, which occurred roughly 12,900 years ago, saw dramatic climate changes that transformed the entire planet within decades. Ice sheets advanced and retreated with unprecedented speed. Ocean currents shifted. Atmospheric conditions changed so rapidly that many species couldn't adapt quickly enough to survive. But the Younger Dryas wasn't just a climate event. It was accompanied by what appears to have been cosmic impacts that left characteristic signatures in geological layers worldwide. Microscopic diamonds, metallic spherules, and other impact-related materials appear in sediment layers dating to this period, suggesting that Earth was struck by fragments of a disintegrating comet or asteroid. Such impacts would have created electromagnetic pulses powerful enough to destroy any electrical technology that existed at the time. The same kind of electromagnetic pulse that modern military planners worry about in nuclear warfare scenarios would have fried ancient electrical systems just as effectively as modern ones. The impacts would have been followed by massive climate disruption, social chaos, and the collapse of any technological infrastructure that required specialized knowledge to maintain. Within a few generations, survivors would have lost the capability to operate or repair electrical systems, even if some of the hardware survived the initial catastrophe. Archaeological evidence suggests that sophisticated prehistoric cultures did indeed disappear around the time of the Younger Dryas event. The Clovis culture in North America, advanced European hunter-gatherer societies, and several other prehistoric civilizations seem to have vanished abruptly rather than evolving gradually into later cultures. Could these vanished civilizations have been electrically powered societies that were destroyed by cosmic catastrophe? The theory gained support from the global distribution of megalithic structures that seem to have been built with techniques that later civilizations could unreplicate. From Göbekli Tepe in Turkey to the Moai of Easter Island, from Stonehenge to the pyramids of Egypt, ancient monuments display engineering capabilities that suggest access to power sources and construction techniques that were later lost. If these monuments were built by electrical civilizations, their construction methods would explain several persistent mysteries. The precise cutting and placement of massive stone blocks would be feasible with electrical tools. The mathematical precision of their layouts would be achievable with electrical measuring and surveying equipment. The acoustic and electromagnetic properties of these structures would make sense if they were designed to work with electrical technologies. The catastrophe theory also explains why so many ancient texts describe earlier ages of higher civilization, followed by periods of decline. Hindu concepts of cyclical time, Greek legends of golden ages that gave way to darker periods, and Native American prophecies of recurring cycles of technological rise and fall all suggest cultural memories of civilizational collapse and renewal. If electrical civilizations rose and fell multiple times throughout prehistory, each cycle would leave behind traces that the next civilization might interpret as divine or magical rather than technological. The gods and heroes of mythology might represent garbled memories of technologically advanced predecessors whose capabilities seemed supernatural to less developed successors. The electrical artifacts we've explored, the Baghdad Battery, the Dendera light bulbs, the mysterious metallurgy and precision manufacturing, might represent not isolated ancient discoveries, but fragments of electrical technologies that survived multiple catastrophic cycles. Each time electrical civilization emerged, it might have reached different levels of sophistication before being reset by natural or cosmic catastrophe. Some cycles might have achieved wireless power transmission. Others might have developed electrical transportation or communication systems. Still others might have mastered electromagnetic manipulation for construction and manufacturing. The fragments that survive from different cycles would appear to be unrelated technological anomalies rather than components of coherent electrical civilizations that existed at different times and places throughout prehistory. Modern electrical civilization might be the latest iteration in a cycle that has repeated many times throughout human history. Our current technological achievements might represent not unprecedented human progress, but the rediscovery of capabilities that were once common but were lost to catastrophe and forgetting. If the catastrophe theory is correct, then our electrical age exists in a precarious balance with natural forces that have previously destroyed similar civilizations. The same cosmic threats, climate instabilities, and electromagnetic vulnerabilities that erased prehistoric electrical societies could potentially reset our own technological civilization. But understanding this cycle might also provide the key to breaking it. If we can learn from the mistakes of previous electrical civilizations, we might be able to build technologies that can survive catastrophic events and preserve knowledge across periods of social and environmental disruption. The catastrophe theory transforms electrical artifacts from isolated curiosities into urgent warnings about the fragility of technological civilization and the importance of developing sustainable, resilient systems that can survive the forces that have previously reset human development. In the shadowed laboratories of medieval Europe, men hunched over furnaces and retorts, pursuing goals that seemed to defy reason. They sought to transform lead into gold, to discover the elixir of life, to capture the philosophical fire that could perfect both matter and spirit. History remembers them as deluded proto-scientists, chasing impossible dreams with primitive methods. But what if the alchemists were actually preserving fragments of electrical knowledge that had survived from much earlier technological civilizations? The language of alchemy is dense with electrical metaphors that seem far too sophisticated for coincidence. Alchemists wrote of philosophical lightning, of living fire that could transform matter without consuming it, of celestial magnets that could attract and direct invisible forces across vast distances. They described processes involving what they called electric waters, solutions that could conduct mysterious forces and transfer properties from one substance to another. They wrote of metals that could be made to dance under the influence of invisible powers, of vessels that could generate light without heat, of mechanical devices that operated through the capture and direction of natural forces. Medieval alchemical texts contain diagrams that look remarkably similar to modern electrical circuit schematics. Symbols representing different substances and processes are connected by lines that suggest the flow of energy or information through complex systems. The alchemist's obsession with specific geometric arrangements, precise temperatures, and exact timing suggests that they were attempting to recreate technological processes they didn't fully understand, but had learned from fragmentary sources that preserved ancient knowledge. Consider the work of Raymond Lull, the 13th century philosopher and alchemist who created mechanical devices he claimed could solve logical problems and reveal hidden truths about the natural world. Lull's machines used rotating discs marked with symbols and connected by complex gearing, systems that he insisted could capture and manipulate natural forces. Modern analysis of Lull's designs suggests that they might have been attempts to recreate computational devices or control systems that he had encountered in much older texts but couldn't fully understand without the underlying technological context. The famous alchemist Paracelsus wrote extensively about electrical medicine, healing techniques that involved the application of invisible forces that could be directed through specific materials and procedures. His descriptions sound remarkably like early experiments with bioelectricity and electromagnetic therapy. Nicholas Flamel, perhaps the most famous of the European alchemists, claimed to have discovered the secret of transmutation through the study of ancient texts that described processes involving liquid fire and solid lightning. His workshop contained devices that contemporary accounts describe as generating light without combustion and heat without visible fuel sources. The persistence of certain alchemical symbols and procedures across centuries suggests that they might have been preserving actual technological knowledge rather than purely symbolic or spiritual practices. The caduceus, for example, the staff entwined with serpents that serves as a symbol of medicine bears, a striking resemblance to a helical coil, the basic component of electrical inductors and transformers. Alchemical texts frequently mention the importance of underground chambers, metal-lined walls, and precise astronomical timing for their most important operations. These requirements match exactly what we would expect for electrical experiments that needed to be shielded from external electromagnetic interference and timed to take advantage of optimal atmospheric electrical conditions. The alchemist's search for the philosopher I's stone might have been an attempt to recreate electrical devices they knew had existed, but whose principles they no longer understood. Descriptions of the stone often emphasize its ability to generate light, transform matter through invisible forces, and operate indefinitely without requiring fuel or maintenance. These properties match remarkably well with what we might expect from advanced electrical devices, perhaps power sources or energy. Conversion systems that operated on principles the medieval alchemists could observe, but couldn't replicate without understanding the underlying physics. The transmission of alchemical knowledge through secret societies and carefully guarded texts suggests that practitioners knew they were preserving information that was both valuable and dangerous. If this information represented fragments of electrical technology that had been deliberately suppressed or lost through catastrophe, the secrecy would make perfect sense. Islamic alchemists like Jabir ibn Hayyan wrote extensively about electrical phenomena centuries before. European natural philosophers began formal investigations into electricity. Their texts describe experiments with what they called captured lightning and provide detailed instructions for creating substances and devices that exhibit electrical properties. The gradual transformation of alchemy into chemistry during the Renaissance might have occurred as practitioners slowly rediscovered the scientific principles underlying the technological fragments they had been preserving through symbolic language and ritual practice. When electrical science finally emerged in the 18th century, many of its pioneers, including Alessandro Volta and Luigi Galvani, were familiar with alchemical texts and may have drawn inspiration from procedures and observations that had been preserved in alchemical literature for centuries. The echo of ancient electrical knowledge might have been resonating through alchemical traditions all along, waiting for the right historical moment to emerge once again as recognizable technology. And if that's true, then other esoteric traditions might also preserve fragments of prehistoric electrical knowledge, disguised as magic and mysticism, but containing practical information about technologies that we're only now rediscovering. The year 1453 marked more than just the fall of Constantinople to Ottoman forces. It marked the beginning of one of history's greatest knowledge migrations, as Byzantine scholars fled westward, carrying libraries filled with ancient texts that had been preserved in the East for over 1,000 years. These manuscripts, many of them Greek originals that had been lost in Western Europe during the Dark Ages, contained fragmentary descriptions of technologies and natural phenomena that had been dismissed as mythology or allegory. But Renaissance scholars, approaching these texts with fresh eyes and new analytical methods, began to recognize patterns that their medieval predecessors had missed. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks overflow with electrical observations disguised as natural philosophy. His studies of lightning, his experiments with friction and static charges, and his designs for machines that operated through invisible forces suggest that he had access to ancient sources that described electrical phenomena in terms he was struggling to understand and recreate. Da Vinci's famous helicopter design, for instance, includes notes about achieving lift through the rapid rotation of helical surfaces. But buried in his marginalia are references to ancient texts that described flying machines powered by celestial magnets and captured lightning, suggesting that his mechanical helicopter might have been an attempt to recreate electrically powered aircraft that he had encountered in classical sources. The Renaissance fascination with magnetism and magnetic compasses led to systematic investigations of magnetic phenomena that had been observed but not understood for centuries. Natural philosophers began experimenting with lodestones, magnetic needles, and the relationship between magnetism and geographical phenomena. But these investigations often referenced much older sources. Giambattista della Porta's famous work, Natural Magic, published in 1558, draws heavily on classical authors who described magnetic phenomena in terms that suggest practical applications rather than purely theoretical knowledge. Della Porta's experiments with magnetic healing, magnetic communication over distance, and magnetic devices for navigation and construction seem to be attempts to recreate technologies described in ancient texts whose practical context had been lost, but whose procedures had been preserved. The rediscovery of classical texts on mathematics and geometry during the Renaissance led to architectural innovations that incorporated precise understanding of acoustic, optical, and structural principles that seemed to exceed what pure mathematical theory should have made possible. Architects like Andrea Palladio and Filippo Brunelleschi designed buildings with electromagnetic properties that they couldn't have understood without some practical experience or traditional knowledge of how structures interact with natural electrical and magnetic fields. The Vatican's collection of ancient manuscripts, much of it rescued from the Library of Alexandria and other classical sources, contains texts that Renaissance scholars studied intensively, but often couldn't interpret correctly without the technological context that would make their practical applications clear. Papal archives include ancient texts that describe what appear to be electrical phenomena in language that Renaissance scholars interpreted as spiritual or alchemical rather than technological. But careful reading of these texts reveals instructions for creating devices and effects that sound remarkably like early electrical experiments. The emergence of experimental natural philosophy during the Renaissance coincided with the rediscovery of ancient texts that emphasized direct observation and practical manipulation of natural forces rather than purely theoretical speculation. Francis Bacon's advocacy of empirical method and experimental investigation might have been inspired partly by classical sources that preserved traditions of practical experimentation from much earlier technological civilizations. Galileo's telescopic observations and experiments with pendulums and falling bodies followed procedures that had been described in ancient texts, suggesting that he might have been recreating experimental methods rather than inventing them entirely from scratch. The Renaissance development of precision timekeeping, improved metallurgy, and advanced optics all drew heavily on classical sources that preserved technical knowledge from earlier periods. The craftsmen and natural philosophers who achieved these advances often acknowledged their debt to ancient authorities whose works they were attempting to understand and apply. By the 17th century, this accumulated rediscovery of ancient knowledge began to coalesce into recognizable electrical science. The electrical experiments of Otto von Guericke, Robert Boyle, and their contemporaries often followed procedures that had been described in ancient and medieval texts, adapted to contemporary understanding and available materials. The path from Renaissance rediscovery to Enlightenment electrical science might represent not the birth of entirely new knowledge, but the gradual reconstruction of technological understanding that had existed in more complete form during earlier periods of human civilization. The printing press, developed during the Renaissance, ensured that this reconstructed knowledge could be preserved and transmitted more reliably than the manuscript traditions that had preserved fragments of ancient electrical knowledge through the medieval period. But even as electrical knowledge reemerged in recognizable form, much of its deeper context remained lost. The practical applications that ancient electrical civilizations had developed, the social and economic systems that had supported electrical technology, and the engineering traditions that had made electrical devices reliable and sustainable were not preserved in the texts that Renaissance scholars recovered. Modern electrical civilization might represent a partial reconstruction of capabilities that were once more fully developed, achieved through different methods and applied to different purposes than those of its prehistoric predecessors. The Renaissance rebirth of electrical knowledge might have been just the beginning of a much longer process of rediscovering human technological potential that was interrupted by catastrophe, but never entirely lost. Picture Rome at the height of its power, but imagine the eternal city glowing against the Mediterranean night with electric light. Forum Romanum bustles with activity long after sunset, illuminated by steady lamps that cast no smoke, require no oil, need no constant tending. Citizens conduct business, philosophers debate, and artists work by light that never flickers with wind or dims with fuel depletion. Roman engineers, masters of concrete and aqueducts, have also mastered the flow of electrical current through networks of copper conduits that parallel their famous water systems. Every villa, every public building, every workshop is connected to generating stations, that harness the power of flowing water, turning the mechanical energy of their sophisticated hydraulic systems into electrical energy that powers an empire. The implications cascade through every aspect of civilization. Roman medicine advances by centuries as physicians work with precise electrical instruments rather than crude mechanical tools. Surgery becomes safer and more sophisticated. Medical knowledge expands as scholars can study anatomy and physiology in well-lit laboratories rather than by flickering candlelight. Roman manufacturing achieves industrial precision centuries before the historical Industrial Revolution. Metalworkers shape steel with electrical furnaces that maintain exact temperatures. Glassworkers create vessels of impossible delicacy. Textile production operates on scales that support not just Roman citizens, but comfortable living standards for populations across the known world. The famous Roman roads become more than pathways for legions and trade caravans. They become electrical transmission lines, carrying power from hydroelectric stations in mountain regions to cities across the empire. Roman engineering expertise in long-distance infrastructure construction serves electrical distribution as effectively as it historically served transportation and water supply. But the transformation goes deeper than technology. Roman education flourishes as students can study regardless of daylight hours or weather conditions. The great libraries of Alexandria, Athens, and Rome operate continuously, preserving and expanding human knowledge at unprecedented rates. Scientific investigation accelerates as researchers can conduct precise experiments with electrical instruments and record observations under consistent lighting conditions. Roman agriculture becomes more productive as electrical irrigation systems precisely control water flow, and electrical processing extends food preservation capabilities. The empire can support larger populations at higher living standards, reducing the economic pressures that historically contributed to imperial expansion and conflict. Communication across the vast Roman territories becomes nearly instantaneous through electrical telegraph systems that follow the same routes as Roman roads. Provincial governors can coordinate policy with Rome in real time, rather than waiting months for messages to travel by horseback and ship. The social implications are revolutionary. Electrical lighting extends useful daylight hours for everyone, not just the wealthy who could afford large quantities of oil or candles. Educational opportunities expand as reading and writing become practical for working people who previously had little access to artificial light during non-working hours. Women's roles in society evolve as household management requires less manual labor when electrical appliances handle tasks like food preservation, textile production, and water heating. Roman society might have developed different concepts of gender roles and family organization with electrical technology, reducing the physical demands of domestic life. Slavery, historically central to Roman economics, becomes less essential when electrical machinery can perform many of the tasks that required human muscle power. The moral arguments against slavery gain economic support as electrical alternatives prove more reliable and cost-effective than human labor for many applications. But perhaps most significantly, Roman expansion patterns change completely. Instead of conquest driven by the need for agricultural land, mineral resources, and slave populations to support urban centers, Roman expansion focuses on electrical resource development. Territories with good sites for hydroelectric generation, mineral deposits useful for electrical equipment, or geographic features that support electrical transmission become the targets of Roman engineering rather than Roman legions. The famous Pax Romana becomes not just military dominance, but technological superiority that makes resistance futile rather than simply dangerous. Barbarian tribes see Roman cities glowing like stars against the landscape and understand that they are re-witnessing capabilities far beyond their own technological horizon. Trade patterns evolve around electrical components and expertise rather than just traditional commodities. Roman merchants export electrical devices and technical knowledge, while importing raw materials needed for electrical infrastructure. Economic relationships develop based on technological interdependence rather than just resource extraction. As Roman electrical civilization matures, exploration accelerates beyond the historical boundaries of Roman expansion. Electrical navigation instruments and ship lighting make sea voyages safer and more reliable. Roman electrical expeditions might reach America centuries before Vikings or Columbus, establish permanent settlements in Africa and Asia, and develop global trade networks based on electrical communication and transportation systems. The barbarian invasions that historically brought down the Western Roman Empire face entirely different challenges. Roman electrical weapons systems, communication networks, and industrial production capabilities create military advantages that make successful invasion nearly impossible. But electrical Roman civilization would face different vulnerabilities. Dependence on electrical infrastructure makes the empire susceptible to systematic sabotage in ways that historical Rome never experienced. Coordinated attacks on generating stations and transmission systems could cripple entire provinces more effectively than traditional military conquest. The complexity of electrical systems requires specialized knowledge that becomes concentrated among technical elites. If this knowledge is lost through war, natural disaster, or social upheaval, the entire electrical infrastructure could collapse more rapidly than traditional Roman institutions. Climate changes or natural disasters that affect the water system's powering. Roman hydroelectric plants could trigger civilization-wide crises that historical Rome would have weathered more easily. But if electrical Roman civilization survived and expanded, human development might have advanced by centuries or millennia. The scientific revolution might have occurred in ancient Rome rather than Renaissance Europe. Industrialization might have begun in the classical period rather than the 18th century. Space exploration and global communication might have been achieved while other regions of the world were still in their Bronze Age. The entire trajectory of human history pivots on that alternative moment when Roman engineers first learned to transform the mechanical energy of flowing water into electrical current that could illuminate their cities and power their civilization. And in that alternative timeline, the question becomes not whether ancient civilizations had electricity, but what happened to the electrical civilizations that came before Rome, and whether our own electrical age represents progress or simply recovery from earlier losses. In the end, we return to where we began, standing in the darkness, wondering about the light. Every evening, when we flip switches that flood our homes with illumination, when we charge devices that connect us to networks spanning the globe, when we take for granted the electrical infrastructure that defines modern civilization, we participate in something that might be far older than we've ever imagined. The electrical age that we consider uniquely modern, the mastery of electromagnetic forces that we credit to the last 3 centuries of scientific discovery, might be nothing more than the latest chapter in a much longer story, a story that stretches back through millennia of human achievement, catastrophe, recovery, and rediscovery. The fragments we've explored throughout this journey, the Baghdad Batteries sitting silent in its museum, case the Dendera reliefs with their impossible resemblance to modern light bulbs, the precision engineering of ancient pyramids that suggests capabilities we can barely achieve today exist as pieces of a puzzle that might be larger and more complex than archaeology has ever imagined. Each artifact stands as a question mark carved in stone, forged in metal, preserved in myth and legend. They ask whether human capability follows the linear progression we've assumed, or whether it moves in cycles of rise and fall, achievement and loss, discovery and rediscovery that span periods far longer than recorded history. The implications haunt more than just our understanding of the past. If electrical civilization has emerged multiple times throughout human history, then our current technological achievements represent not unprecedented progress, but participation in patterns that are ancient and cyclical. We become not the first humans to master electromagnetic forces, but the most recent. And if that's true, then the same vulnerabilities that brought down previous electrical civilizations' catastrophic climate change, social collapse, the loss of specialized knowledge still threaten our own technological society. The cosmic impacts that might have destroyed prehistoric electrical civilizations continue to rain down from space. The electromagnetic pulse effects that could have wiped out ancient electrical infrastructure would be even more devastating to our more complex and interconnected electrical systems. The social and environmental stresses that might have caused earlier electrical civilizations to abandon their technologies, resource depletion, population pressure, political upheaval mirror challenges that our own electrical civilization faces today. But the cyclical view of electrical civilization also offers hope. If humans have achieved electrical mastery multiple times throughout history, then the knowledge required to build and maintain electrical technologies appears to be recoverable even after periods of complete civilizational collapse. The human capacity for technological achievement might be more resilient than we've assumed. The fragments of ancient electrical knowledge that have survived in artifacts, myths, and esoteric traditions suggest that important information can be preserved across dark ages in forms that allow later civilizations to rediscover and reconstruct lost capabilities. Perhaps most encouragingly, each iteration of electrical civilization might achieve different aspects of technological mastery, building on fragments from previous cycles, while developing new approaches that earlier civilizations hadn't explored. Our modern electrical age might represent not just rediscovery of ancient capabilities, but synthesis of multiple prehistoric electrical traditions that survived in different forms and are now converging in new combinations that could be more robust and sustainable than any single previous electrical civilization. The wireless power transmission that Tesla envisioned might combine prehistoric understanding of Earth electrical currents with modern electronics and material science. The sustainable energy systems we're redeveloping might integrate ancient knowledge of solar and magnetic phenomena with contemporary engineering capabilities. The global communication networks that connect our electrical civilization might represent the fulfillment of ancient dreams of instantaneous contact across vast distances, achieved through methods that combine traditional understanding of electromagnetic propagation with modern computational power. But perhaps the most profound implication of the electrical continuity theory is what it suggests about human nature itself. If electrical civilization emerges repeatedly throughout human history, then the drive to understand and harness electromagnetic forces might be fundamental to human consciousness. The ability to see beyond the obvious, to recognize invisible forces that can be controlled and applied for practical purposes, might be as essentially human as language, art, or social organization. The myths and legends that preserve memories of earlier electrical civilizations, stories of gods who wielded lightning, heroes who brought fire from heaven, divine teachers who showed humans how to master invisible forces, might represent not primitive superstition, but sophisticated understanding of human technological potential. We are the descendants of electrical pioneers who achieved mastery over electromagnetic forces in prehistoric times. We inherit not just their genetic material, but their curiosity, their ingenuity, and their determination to transform the raw forces of nature into tools that serve human purposes. The glow of electric light that illuminates our cities echoes across centuries and millennia, connecting us to ancestors who might have walked beneath similar artificial illumination in civilizations whose names have been forgotten, but whose achievements continue to resonate through human culture. When we marvel at electrical phenomena, the spark that jumps between our fingers on dry days, the aurora that dances across polar skies, the lightning that splits the darkness of summer storms, we respond to forces that humans might have been investigating and harnessing for far longer than conventional history suggests. The electrical age doesn't begin with Franklin's kite or Edison's bulb. It begins with the first human who noticed that certain stones attract iron, who observed that lightning follows predictable patterns, who who wondered whether the invisible forces that move through nature could be understood and controlled. That first electrical pioneer might have lived 10,000 years ago, or 50,000 years ago, or even earlier in the vast span of human prehistory. But their descendants, all of us, continue their work, generation after generation, rediscovering and expanding the mastery of electrical forces that might be humanity's oldest and most persistent technological quest. The lights that glow in our windows tonight might be answering lights that glowed in ancient cities whose electrical networks spanned continents and whose power sources drew energy from natural forces we are only beginning to understand. And if we listen carefully to the hum of electricity that flows through the walls around us, we might hear echoes of knowledge that stretches back through dark ages and catastrophes to the very beginning of human technological ambition. The glow that haunts us isn't just the light of modern achievement. It's the eternal flame of human curiosity about the invisible forces that shape our world, flame that has been passed from civilization to civilization, from discovery to rediscovery, from ancient hands to ours. And in that eternal flame, the darkness doesn't seem quite so absolute anymore. If you've journeyed with us through these explorations of ancient electrical possibilities, consider following our channel for more investigations into the mysteries that conventional history has yet to solve. The past holds more questions than answers, and every question opens new doorways to understanding who we are and what we might become.